website. We are, as I've been saying for the last little bit, we are really winding down to the end. This is the last week before we get into the outro, if you will. This is kind of the last week of verses about the subject at hand before he gets into the conclusion, the summarizing verses. And we're in a very kind of an uncomfortable series of verses. I will freely admit that. This is kind of difficult to go through because it seems kind of dark and dreary, which again, that's a lot of the books can seem dark and dreary. But I've already spoken out what I think is the really the empowering piece behind it. So we're going through he contrasted the difference between youth, which again is his actual it's really who he's focusing the book on. He's focusing the book on the young to go and take advantage of life. And then he has this funny contrast between the young and somebody who's on the other side of life, really kind of past, nearing the end, if you will. And so we had a couple verses there that spoke about the slow, I would say the slow process of the person losing their senses, literally the senses, sight, hearing, taste, or speech, or things like that. So that's what we were discussing. This week's verse, the beginning of this week's verses, will continue that theme, but then the kicker will come in and give us the point of it all. So we just didn't quite finish the series of verses yet last week. So without any further ado, let's go to the screen share. Give me a second here. Okay. So there's our screen. And we are looking here at, again, this is chapter 12, verse number 5. Okay, chapter 12, verse number 5. And I will freely admit also that this verse is a very difficult verse to translate. Every single commentator has a totally different understanding of what's going on over here. And so that makes it very difficult for us to figure out what's going on over here because there's little to no consensus in the commentaries. So what do you do with that? What do you do when nobody agrees? I think on the other hand, however, it does allow a little more interpretation or self-interpretation. So we could go through every kind of bit of this verse over here and look at it from our own perspective. This is definitely the case with all the verses so far in this chapter. They've been very difficult to translate. Just the simple wording is difficult. Words that never show up anywhere else, or strange connections between one thing and the next. So that's what we're going to be looking at over here. Let's see what we can come up with. So he says, "Gam migavoah yira'u." They also fear heights. V'chatchatim baderech, and chatchatim baderech, chatchatim on the road. It's unclear exactly what chatchatim are, but practically speaking, it would appear from a lot of the commentaries that it's a term for something that is fearful, that it inspires fear. Okay, chatat, chat tough. I'm sorry. Would be chitat would be fear, but it's kind of like a fear of an impending doom, if you will. So in the sense that that phrase is used when referring to the Jewish people as they were entering the land of Canaan, it refers to the chitat of the nations. So it's an impending fear of this coming something coming. That's kind of a very specific type of fear, as opposed to yira'u, which would be just your general everyday fear. Okay. So again, they fear the heights and the doom on the road. V'yan eitz hashaked, and there is a disgust of tranquility. Okay. V'yistabel hechagov. This is a weird one, and they must suffer, or they must handle, or suffer in the sense of having to handle something that's difficult. They must handle the grasshopper. v'tafer ha'aviona, and it is and the aviona loses its ability or is nullified. I cannot translate aviona right now. We will get back to aviona what it is in a second. Ki holech ha'adam el beit olamo, because the person is going to their eternal house. V'savavu vashuk hasofidim, and they gather or they surround in the street the eulogizers, the people who give eulogies. Okay, as you see, again, a very difficult verse. For just simply translation is a very difficult verse. Forget the content. Let's read that one more time, maybe kind of more straight through it. Gami gavo ahiro, also from the heights they are fearful. V'chat chatim baderech, and the doom on the road. V'yon eitz hashaked, and there is a disgust of tranquility. V'yistabel hechagav, and they must suffer the grasshopper, which would be a great name for a rock band, I have to say. Suffer the grasshopper. Maybe an album, maybe a rock album, more like. Anyway, v'tafer ha'aviona, and there is a nullification of the aviona. Again, we'll discuss what that is in a second. Ki holecha adam el beit olamo, because the person is going to their eternal house, the house of their world, literally. V'savavu vashuk hasofidim, and the eulogizers are surrounding in the streets. Okay, clearly the end of that verse I don't think needs much explanation. We're talking about somebody who is literally on their way to their next stop, to their terminus. But we're kind of leading up to the last step. So what we've had is the past couple of verses we've had, just scrolling up over here, he had the sight disappearing, which we said was in all likelihood and most times of history was the first sense to go, because again, anybody who wears glasses nowadays would be blind if they lived in any other time of history. Then you've got the mouth and its capabilities, the ability to speak and to taste and things like that begins to dwindle. You've got sound, or the ability to listen to hear, also going. And so here we have the fourth thing. Okay, the fourth thing that starts to, or that is kind of the last step, if you will. And that is, I believe that a lot of this is referring to the physical motion, the ability to move physically, to go around and do one's do action. If you think about it, when somebody becomes frail or incapacitated, so that's what we're referring to over here. So in that sense, I think at least the first line makes a lot of sense. They are fearful of heights. That means rising, right? So to get up, to take a step, to walk up a staircase or something like that becomes very difficult. There is a fear related to that. I remember I was in a couple times, I went to San Jose, California, and they have there the Winchester Mystery House. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it. Sarah Winchester, I think her name was. She was the heiress to the Winchester Rifle Company. And there's 100 years ago or so, and she had this crazy idea that if she finished building her house, then she would die or something like that. So she kept on building and building and building. It's a tourist attraction, a bit of a tourist trap, but it's really fun. But they have what they call easy rising steps, right? So every step's only like this much higher than the step before it. So in the space of one staircase, you actually have like 100 stairs because it winds back over, back on itself a bunch of times. Because she was also like 4'5", so they have these little short ceilings. But the point is simply that as a person ages, it gets more difficult to walk up an incline, or any of the dooms on the road, right? Just travel in general becomes very difficult. I remember the last time my grandfather flew, it was the last time he was going to fly. It became so difficult, and it was very difficult for him to do any sort of travel at all. And this is a person who traveled his entire life, but there just came a time when that becomes very difficult. So there is not just a fear of the heights itself, but the road itself, even the flat road, becomes a source of impending doom, if you will, if it's not a little too dark. And then there's this interesting thing, because you would think, so what happens if somebody is in this point of their life where they are they're bound to some sort of a sedentary life. You'd think that okay, then you'd just work to settle into that. But the reality is, it doesn't quite work like that. The Yonetz Hashaked is the person is disgusted, does not like to be bound like that. I remember I would when I was in school in high school, I would get uh, I would get brought along to visit some elderly people in nursing homes, and there's all different types of people in nursing homes, but there's a number of them who are they sit there and they just watch the television all day. That's all the capacity that they have left, and it's a very sad thing, obviously. Um, and and we pray that we don't end up in such a situation. So the reality is that for somebody who's like this, there's a disgust, a disinterest in this life. Whereas somebody who's young and working hard and things like that, they would think, oh, it's going to be great when I could just sit back and relax and not worry about, in reality, there's a desire, a need to go out and do things, but an unfortunate paradox where they want to go out and do things, but they're unable to, you know. Another thing that I learned from my grandfather, I remember he would go, he was quite elderly at this point, and he was going to the gym like three times a week. And he told me all he does is he goes from machine to machine in the gym and does one motion, no weights attached or anything like that, but just so that he can keep all his joints working and everything. Because you don't want to be sitting there not doing anything. You don't want to be sitting there bound to a bed or a wheelchair, things like that. Unfortunately, it's the case for many people, and that's what he's referring to over here. This is a very interesting term, vayistabel hechagov, okay, which I said again means that they must suffer the grasshopper. Um, there's quite a number of interpretations of this. Some of them rely on changing some of the letters around here and flipping it around. It always gets dangerous when you do that because it doesn't work so well. I saw one explanation. I believe it was the Mitsuda, who's one of our go-to commentaries. He says that the idea over here is, how heavy is a grasshopper? It's nothing. It can land on your shoulder. You wouldn't know about it. But if a person reaches a certain point of deterioration, their body can't even handle any weight of any sort on it. So it's kind of a allegorical, but they must suffer even the weight of a grasshopper. Even that becomes too much for them to handle. So I'm imagining somebody who's bent over, unable to, walk straight. Everything becomes difficult. All travel becomes difficult. So this would kind of be our fourth um, sense. I guess not so much of a sense, but it's similar. Sight, uh, taste, or talking, uh, uh, sound, the ability to hear, and finally the ability to travel and go about and do things. There's one last thing that he puts over here in the related category is v'tafer aviona. So again, this is a very strange phrase, and I did not see a single commentary that had an easy way to explain what this means. I would think aviona would you be a feminine version of evion, which would be a pauper, a poor person, a very poor person. Although I cannot see any way that that would fit over here, so I'm forced to kind of go with some of the other commentaries, even though I don't like that either. And even I think they even agree that it's not a great explanation. That aviona would be related to the word ta'av, tough, aleph bet. So it would be as though there's a hidden letter tough over here, which would mean pleasure or desire. And so this is a reference, and this is actually how the sages learned also. The tafer ha'aviona is a reference to the deterioration or the dissipation of um, sexual desire. Okay, tafer ha'aviona, meaning that at that point, at some point, that also goes away. So for somebody who's in their youth, they can't imagine such a thing going away. It would be impossible to imagine. But in reality, as a person reaches this later period of their life, that would be something that does slowly deteriorate or go away entirely. So again, that's tafer aviona. Tafer just to clarify, yafer, if that was a yud there, the letter yud means to do away with something. Okay, there's a rule that if a young girl is in her father's house, and she takes a vow, the father can do away with the vow because she doesn't know what she's doing. She's under her father's jurisdiction. It's not up to her to make her own decisions on that. The father it's one of the parental rights. So the father is able to do away with that. That's called hafarat nidarim, right? It's the doing away with a vow. So nullifying or doing away with something. So that also is the an aspect of this fourth deterioration is the reduction of desire. Again, kind of specifically sexual desire, but desire in general. Okay.
Rabbi,
So, I'm sorry.
that
Yes.
yeah, that concept comes up in Chaye Sarah, the Haftorah for Chaye Sarah, where Hamelech David is Zakein Babi Yamim. They brought him clothes, and he didn't get any warmth, so they brought him young ladies, and he didn't have any desire for them.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, is there any vocabulary that corresponds to that, Parsha?
That is a very good question, and that's a very good connection. Also, that's really good. Um,
That was my bar mitzvah portion. That's why I know it.
oh, there you go. I was thinking, wow, he really knows his stuff. Um,
Only a little.
only a little. Okay. Yeah, I don't recall anything like that there, but it would kind of match. It would kind of match King Solomon at the end of his life, looking at his own father. I think that's actually kind of a good connection. His own father. That's the last thing we know, so to speak, of King David. Um, that yeah, he was brought Avishag, the girl. And it's unclear from the verses themselves whether the intention was for Abishag to be a sexual partner or not, but it's very clear from the verses that David never does actually have an intimate relationship with her, even though she sits on his lap and all that. Um, the verses says as Jacob could tell us, the verse explicitly says that he did not sleep with her. So I would wonder. It's kind of a fitting thing for King Solomon to be saying such a thing as his kind of last step. Right, this is the last step, and then he moves into Ki holech adam el beit olamo, because this person is going towards his eternal resting place. Interesting use, by the way, of the word Adam. We tend to find Adam as a reference to humanity as a whole, not a specific person. Particularly in the book of Kohelet, we've seen in the past chapters that Adam seems to be a reference to humanity. Perhaps there's something there. I didn't think it just occurred to me as I read it right now that that's the case. So anyway, so we are talking now. So this is the last step, right? The person is going to Beit Olamo. The Savu Vashuk Hasofadim and the eulogizers are surrounding in the street. I see, envisioning them gathering, people who I have to imagine they get paid for this or something like that. So they come and they're ready, right? They see the person on their last legs, if you will, and so they're ready to step in and do their job. And I think there's something important with that because King Solomon over here does not feel like that's appropriate. What I'm reading over here is he says, yeah, they're surrounding almost in a derogatory sense. Yeah, the eulogizers are already surrounding in the street, ready to go. But I think there's a big, however over here, verse number 6. Okay, so again, verse number 5 was kind of difficult. Let's see verse number 6, where he continues the allegory. Kind of totally different allegory. The allegory over here is to a well. So to explain this, let's just clarify that. Let's imagine a well. So you have a pit. There's a machinery, some sort of wheel over the pit. There's a rope on the wheel connected to a bucket. Okay, so there's kind of three parts to the well itself, besides for the hole in the ground. You've got the machinery or the wheel, you've got the rope, and you've got the bucket. And then once you have water in the bucket, you would transfer it to a pitcher. Okay, so you transfer the water from a bucket to a pitcher. Just to get the vision in our head for reading this verse. Ad shelo yeratek chevel hakesef, until the the silver rope has been snapped. The tarutz gulat hazahav, and the golden bucket has been crushed. The tishaver kad al mabua, and the pitcher has been shattered on the well itself. The narotz hagalgal el habor, and the wheel is broken into the pit. So the wheel breaks into the pit. So until that point, I think he's saying, which will become clear in the next verse, until that point, these eulogizers are acting inappropriately, right? They're standing there waiting to go, basically counting the person as already gone. But in the reality, he says, I believe the idea of this verse is telling us that it's not true. As long as these things have not happened, then in that case, the person still has something to contribute, something to do in this world. So it doesn't matter. The person could be, literally blind, dumb, deaf, buckled over, as long as there's still a silver wire and a golden bucket and all those things. The person still has abilities. The use of silver and gold here, I think, is just to show you how precious life is, every moment of life. From a halachic perspective, we are very careful of life, even those little few seconds of life that a person at the end of a person's life. We are generally not. It's very difficult for us to consider concepts such as euthanasia and things like that, because we believe that life is very, very precious from a halachic perspective. And I think that's part of what he's talking about, part of the feeling he's giving over here. So he says all these people, they're surrounding in the shuk, in the marketplace, the eulogizers are surrounding, ready to go. And he says, "Ad, it's not yet," right? In other words, shouldn't be ready yet until the silver cord has snapped. Okay, and that causes the bucket to break and the pitcher to shatter and the wheel to crumble. Okay. Let's discuss a couple of these words over here just to get clear what they all are. Taruts and narots are both ideas of crushing, right? So something crushes over something else, as opposed to tishaver means something breaks on its own. I don't know why there's a shift over there and why it shifts back necessarily. I guess it's kind of a crumbling versus a shattering, I guess is how you would put it. So the bucket, the bucket of the well itself kind of gets crushed or shattered. No, and now I'm mixing up my words. Gets, I guess crushed of some sort by the weight of it falling into the pit. The pitcher gets shattered on the well, which would indicate that it's still on the top. These may be unimportant. I'm trying to clarify the allegory over here. So you've got this allegory of the well, and so it's kind of shattering. All the pieces are falling apart. Until that happens, there's still something to the person's life. The life of the person is still important, has not lost its importance. Again, I think I was halfway through saying before, the usage of silver and gold is just to tell us how important this is. Imagine the cord was made of silver. Imagine the bucket was made of gold. Okay, in other words, these are very precious things. I'm kind of perceiving over here 4 different steps. Why does he talk about 4 different things? I think the use of the allegory of the well is actually really, really amazing. In Judaism, wells are very important. Practically all of our forefathers and matriarchs, they all met at a well, right? Or did something at a well. Abraham does stuff with wells, and Isaac does stuff with wells, and Jacob does stuff with wells, and wells are all over Judaism, and there's reasons for that, I believe, and that's because wells are a place of kindness. They're a place where you can contribute to society, and in an agrarian society, a well is where everybody meets up. Like we find that Jacob is there with all the with all the shepherds at the well when he first meets Rachel. So there is kind of this, it's a place where society forms. It's a place where a person's not alone at a well. A person meets and does things at a well. It's a place of business, a place of contribution to society. So in other words, we look at a person as a well too. We look at life, the life force, the creative force of humanity as a well. Your well is still working as long as you're still connected to it, as long as there's still a way to get into that water and draw the water out, as long as there's a bucket to pull the things out. Obviously, the cord is not going to do much without the bucket attached to it. And then it's again transferred into a pitcher. It's allowed to go and be taken somewhere else. Your personal creative abilities are not limited to your own little area around you. They go and they can do things in faraway places. So that's the pitcher. So and even with all those things, there's still access to well. Even if let's say this a rope were to snap, or the bucket were to crash, and the pitcher were to shatter, there would still be hope until the well itself crumbles. Okay, until the wheel crumbles into the well, at which point that's when there's, so to speak, an inability to salvage the situation. So as long as a person has this ability, and as long as we're still alive and kicking, as you will, if you will, then we have this ability to do things. We are able to contribute to society. We're able to use delve into our own well and to provide to society as a whole. Again, the well being this social atmosphere, this creative atmosphere. That's kind of the idea that I see in this verse over here, is that it obviously it's very poetic, silver cords and golden buckets and all that sort of stuff. But I think the idea is very, it gives you this beautiful sense of what life is. It's not just a well. It's a well with a silver cord and a golden bucket, and every moment we have in our lives are very important. Again, as I said before, from a halachic perspective, it doesn't matter if a person's, totally incapacitated, has little to no mental capacity at all. We still treat that as a living person. If someone were to rush their passing, it could be very it could be a great halachic issue, because of the fact that we are very, very careful of life itself. Obviously, actual questions should be addressed to a competent halachic authority if somebody is in a real situation. I know with my own father, we were in a very similar situation, and there was things to be done. So I just wanted, that's a disclaimer, if you will. If a person's ever in or facing such a situation, that question should be addressed to a competent halachic authority. Okay, so this verse is telling us that the eulogizers, the people, the sofadim, the people who are going, they're already writing the speech for the eulogy, are incorrect. The well is still running. Something's still going in the well. They say, what was what's his name? Mark Twain's famous line, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, or something like that. When one of the newspapers announced that he had died when he was really still perfectly fine. So in other words, as long as the things are still going, it's inappropriate for people to write them off as gone, right? They're still here. There's still what to do with them. So I think that's kind of, as I said, we're always focused on trying to get to the positive. What are these verses telling us? Is telling us, and this is what I've been speaking out for the past couple of weeks, is that there is a preciousness to life. If a person has any of their capacities, even if they lost their sight, they still have their taste, or they lost those and they still have their hearing, or if they lost those but they still can walk and travel, or even if they lose those, as long as the rope has not snapped yet, so to speak, then there is still what a person can do. And there's still things for a person to do and to contribute to society, to contribute to the world around them. They are not gone at that point. And then there is, and this is verse number 7, there is a final point. There is a point where it doesn't happen, where there is nothing. There isn't a there is a final point. Vayashov ha'afar al haaretz kishe haya, and the dust will return to the earth as it once was. V'haruach tashuv el ha'elokim asher nesana, and the spirit, or the wind, literally, will return to God that gave it in the first place. Okay? So again, v'yashov ha'afar al haaretz kishehaya, the dust will settle back, will go back to the earth as it was. V'haruach tashuv el ha'elokim, and the spirit or the wind, the life, will return back to God, Asher Nisana, who gave it in the first place. Again, kind of a not not a dark end to the book, but rather kind of a comforting end. It's not a it's over and that's it, but it's rather everything goes back to how it should be in a way. The dust returns to the earth and the spirit returns to God.
This verse makes me really sad.
It is a sad verse. Yes. It is. There's no question about that. And anyone who has experienced loss, obviously, this is a very difficult verse to hear. But I do think that hidden inside of it is, as I was saying, I think hidden inside of it is something that's kind of special. There's a completion. There's a coming full circle that happens. I have there's I don't know if anyone's ever read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay, it's a very quirky book. It's actually a series of books, and the author, as Douglas Adams, as he got older and older, he added a couple more kind of books to it. So he called it a trilogy, even though it had 5 or 6 parts to it. And then actually other authors have added to it since then. But the original 6 books, so if you buy it as the complete Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, it ends with the story at the beginning actually happening. So in other words, the story at the beginning it's kind of crazy. It's kind of a kooky story, but the Earth is being destroyed to make way for a highway in space. Okay. And it doesn't happen because of time change and all sorts of this and that. Or it does happen, but the main character survives. And throughout the course of these 6 books, I'm sorry if this is spoiling the book for anyone. It's been out for 50 years, so I think I can talk about it now. At the end of the last book, he does all the time warps and all that sort of stuff come together, and he actually does pass with Earth passing. And I think there's something almost poetic about that, something almost nice. It's actually one of my favorite book endings because it's almost like appropriate. It's things going to the place where they should go. Yeah. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on this too much. As Jacob said, it is a sad verse. It's a sad but almost comforting verse, and it is really the end of the main meat of Kohelet. As he finishes off this statement over here, what does he end off with saying? And we'll just take 2 more minutes on this. Havel Havalim Amar HaKohelet, right? Hevel, right? We've talked about Hevel many times already, right? This steam of steams says the Kohelet, which we'll talk about that in a second. Hakol Havel, everything is steam. Okay, and I think it's very interesting. So this is clearly a repetition of the verse he said way back when in chapter 1, right? Way back when, chapter 1, verse number 2, right? He says Havel Havalim Amar Kohelet, right? Steam of steams says Kohelet. Havel Havalim Hakol Havel, right? Steam of steams, everything is steam. And there he says 7 times the word steam, right? Or I guess technically 5 times, but 2 of them are in plural form, right? So he says 5 times the word steam. And so there's a discrepancy between this verse and that verse. In this verse, number 1, it only says Havel Havalim once, and it says Hakol Havel, right? In the original verse, it had a repetition of this Havel Havalim. And the other difference is that he's just referred to as Kohelet way back when, and here he's Ha-Kohelet, the Kohelet. That's an interesting change that occurs in King Solomon throughout this process. I think part of it is we spoke about nearly 2 years ago now when we started the book. We talked about Kohelet. The name means to gather, and the qualifications that King Solomon has is that he's the gatherer. He gathers wisdom. He doesn't just have wisdom. He was a wise person also, right? Wisest of all people, according to the prophet. However, He's also a gatherer of wisdom. He is in Jerusalem. We talked about it's the center of the world. All he had the money, he had everything he needed to gather the wisest minds together and discuss these things all together. So now he kind of puts the feather in his cap. He says, I'm really the Kohelet. I'm really the gatherer. So all the things I've showed you are words that have been gathered by that I have gathered from all my sources. But what you find over here is that the steam has dissipated a little bit. He's not saying that it's not, I've clarified everything in life for you. All right, life is clear now. Everyone's read Kohelet. You could go about your business. Life is clear. No, it's still Havel Havalim. It's very steamy, right? It's very, very difficult to, again, steam. What's the idea of steam? It's impossible, nearly impossible to catch. It has no purpose, but actually, if you know how to capture it and distill it and use it, you can power trains and you can do anything with steam. Steam is a very powerful substance if you know how to capture it. So in that sense, he says over here also that the world is still Hevel. It's still this thing that you have to work really hard, but there's little less of it now, right? If you've gone through the book of Kohelet, we've taken away one of the Havel Havelims, right? There's a little less of it now. Maybe we have a little easier time kind of getting through the haze as we move on. So I believe that this is kind of the ending of the meat of the book of Kohelet. We'll discuss in the coming weeks the conclusion, how he talks about what it means to continue studies beyond this point. Not to just think, okay, I finished the book. I'm the smartest. I learned everything there is to know from the smartest man alive, the smartest man in history. He'll talk about in the conclusion what your next steps have to be. But here he is just saying that I hope throughout this whole process that as the gatherer of all wisdom, that I have provided you with a little bit of vision through the steam, the ability to see through the haze and gain something from life. Again, the book of Kohelet is divided into two parts. Part one was happiness, and part two was wisdom. That's how we kind of conceptualized it. So I think his point is that I hopefully have provided you with some guidance in figuring that out. All right, so that is it for this week. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will not meet next week. Next week is a fast day and the day following Rosh Hashanah, so it would be very difficult to meet for me personally. And the week after that is Yom Kippur. The week after that is Sukkot. So we might be able to do it. I don't know. I'm actually going to be out of town that day. So I'll see if I'll still have the ability to give the class. So anyway, keep your eyes open over the coming weeks for when everything starts up.